understand. I understand you're looking at some Android devices that are being compromised.
Yes, there's a subset of Android devices out there that I guess have the debugging interface still enabled, even though it's in a deployed state.
Most Android devices in the operating system, they have a debugging port, the Android debugger bridge, which is not enabled by default, but you can enable it and then you can interact with it to debug your program and whatnot.
As you're writing software, and especially when it's combined with hardware, there's a debugging process. Android has a great debugging interface that gives you a lot of power and permissions. The problem is when you deploy the device, you got to turn that off. This management interface is on port 5555 TCP. Somebody figured out how to build a botnet of these devices. The way I figure is probably there's a specific type of device that maybe somebody was developing, and then when it was time to flash a whole bunch of them, they flashed an image that had this part enabled and probably forgot to go through that checklist.
Yeah, because once you've got access to that ADB, you can run a shell, because Android is just Linux. So yeah, this is actually kind of scary that's exposed to the internet. And I guess the story that I saw, they were using that to install Monero miners on it or something?
Yes, cryptocurrency mining. That seems to be the big thing now, actually. We're all talking about it. It seems to be a good way to monetize the assets you have access to. And that's exactly what's happening here. Now, the article I read, it said that since the botnet started, they've gotten about $3 worth of cryptocurrency.
So it's not really
so it hasn't
working out too well.
Yes, it hasn't worked out that well for them yet. But, in terms of mining, it's a time game. You just, it takes time to mine the cryptocurrency. Otherwise, I guess it would devalue really quickly. Another point in the article was actually some of these miners are so aggressive that they could actually damage the device. So that was another point.
So they run the CPU so hot that it...
Yes, they have that potential. And I'm pretty sure these fraudsters don't really care about the devices they're impacting.
It's not theirs, so what do they care, right?
Right. So they're probably not doing like production level testing to make sure there's no side effects of running this on all these compromised devices. When you're developing an application or a product or an IoT device, there's a part in your development cycle where you need a debugging interface turned on. But once you're done, you got to turn that off before you create the production image. I would say that's probably the most important lesson.
There's some opportunity for someone to have some kind of, not necessarily a government underwriter's lab kind of thing, but some independent group, maybe a consumer IoT group that does some kind of testing of the devices that people release and certifies. It says, this passes the top 10 checks that we find of, most vulnerability things, something that looks for like all those really common things, like what ports are open and whatnot, default passwords, things of that nature, and says, gives some kind of seal of approval or something that the vendors or the manufacturers can put on their boxes and say, hey, we're, class 1 certified for this kind of thing. I think there are some IoT-based industry working groups trying to think about that, but I don't know if they've gotten anywhere with it. So, but it would be nice to see something like that.
I hope the Underwriters Lab does do it because it's like well recognized. And I thought I read an article somewhere like a few weeks ago that actually said that they might be looking into that. So I hope they are.
Okay. No, yeah, I hope so too, because we need better security around these things, especially when it's not something you actually physically touch from the computing standpoint on a regular basis. And it's just kind of a device that's out there and you just take it for granted that it's working properly, but you don't have really good insight to what it's doing at the network layer.
Yes.
Something like this is kind of needed to know what is your exposure with this new device that you're bringing into your house or your business. You might want to try to do some scans or test to see if you have a lot of this inadvertently enabled on your devices. You could probably use Nmap to scan, find out what devices either in your corporate network or exposed to the internet are listening on that port, and then make sure that those get closed down.
For organizations that are creating software and hardware, it's probably a good idea to have like a pre-deployment checklist before you put your solution out there to make sure that you go through all of the things that need to be turned off. One of them might be to make sure you turn off your debugging interface.